Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion. It's not a straightforward review. It's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on X or Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but you can support us on there if you want. It's just a extra weekly bonus episode when you sign up of everything else that I'm watching this week. This week isn't a great example, honestly, because I was out of town, didn't watch a lot, but I will be back next week, and we have a lot of fun on there. So I have a returning guest. I have Mike on the line with me. Say hi, Mike.
Hello.
Welcome back. You were telling me before we started that this is your almost like a triumphant return to podcasting, that you haven't done that in a while, but if guests haven't heard your voice on here, would you mind kind of introducing yourself a little bit?
Yeah, hi, my name is Mike. If you're on the social media stuff, you can find me at the Mike Snyder on Instagram or Twitter, or I think that's about it these days, or on Letterboxd, actually. I don't interact a lot on there, but if you want to keep track of all the movies that I'm watching, that's where I am.
Nice.
But I believe you and I met through podcasting or through Twitter.
Yes.
And I like movies. I have since the last time I was on this podcast, I've made a movie.
Oh my gosh, tell us about that.
Well, I made a short film that I was actually trying to make before the pandemic. And then the world shut down, and then my personal life took a pretty sizable change as well, so a lot of things kind of got in the way, but I got it back on track and got it made, and it's finally done, and
Nice.
it's been doing the festival rounds, and it was really cool. I actually just won an award from the Days of the Dead horror convention.
Wow.
Yeah, we were the winner of the Trauma Award.
Wow, that is so cool. I know exactly what that means.
Yeah, it was
great.
I was kind of shocked, I mean, I'm proud of the film. I'm proud of everybody that worked on it. I think everybody just, did a great job, and it was fun, and it was, I had a lot of good friends just, help and support it and all that. But I was like, well, this movie's not like full on horror. So the film is more of it's a very Clerks-esque kind of story that kind of takes a horror spin towards the end. And so I was like, I don't know if it'll get, a huge horror response, because it's soft in its horror element, at least for, a good chunk of it. And then, hey, it got some attention, and I was like, wait, I've got a lot of self-doubt, and now people are giving me awards. So
that's so cool. Wow, what a full circle moment for you.
Yeah, it was great. It was super, super exciting, and it's been getting a little attention at a few other award spots, and it's still in contention for a few that are going to be coming into play later this year.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's just cool. I mean, I love movies, and so to get to make one is super cool. And now we're developing a feature film that we're trying to get done, and that's delightful nightmare is kind of the spot I'm at right now, where it's like, oh, I've got everything to go except money.
Yeah. Wow, I can't imagine. I've seen some of your campaigning efforts, but feel free to send me that link. I'm happy to include it in the show notes too.
For for sure. Yeah, once we get like all that stuff going for the new thing, I'll bug everybody.
Okay, great. That works for me. Well, that's so awesome. So we have another filmmaker on the podcast then. But if this is your first time tuning in, a lot of people ask me, "Oh, can we do this movie or that movie?" Well, the good news is you pick the movie. And so as long as we haven't done it before, which someday I'll probably relax that rule because there's been so many episodes and I know it was a little bit of labor for you, Mike, to kind of look through all those. But what movie did you choose to talk about today?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you say that because last time I was on, we did Masters of the Universe, which is like
That's
near and dear
right.
to my heart, and I was so glad I was able to get on the show and talk about that one. And then you're like, "Hey, you want to come on again?" I'm like, "Yeah," because it's. I mean, you're just a fun person to talk to anyway. And then
Oh,
talking
that's so
about
sweet, Mike. I feel the same way.
checks in checks in the mail, right? No,
Yeah.
but
Yes, please.
but it was like I was, I was trying to think of another movie, and there was like one or two that I was like, oh, and then I was scrolling on your feed, and I was like, that one's been done, that one's been done, and I was like, okay, and you're not doing the repeats. I was like, which is cool. I think like I think that's a cool thing because it's like you're gonna have 20 episodes of people talking about 2001 or The Dark Knight or something.
Yeah,
And,
eventually I need to relax because to be honest, early on when we were doing this, those were great episodes, but I feel like people have more than one story to share about a movie, so like I am open to that, but yeah, I haven't done it yet.
yeah, I think you'll. Yeah, I mean, this show's going to go on for another 100 years,
Of
so you gotta,
course. Naturally.
you might want to be like, yeah, let's touch base on this one again now, or with somebody different, somebody else's voice on it, which
Mhm.
could be cool. But yeah. So, but it was also cool for me because then I had to kind of dig. I'm like, well, what movies can I talk about? Because just because a movie's my favorite or something that I love doesn't necessarily mean I'm like, oh, I can go on somebody's podcast and talk about it for at great length or whatever. And so I had to think
Mhm.
about it. But the movie that I chose for today is the 1981 John Borman film Excalibur.
Wow. So, I guess I'm gonna reveal something here. I've never seen this movie before, so this was my first time.
Okay, all right.
So I'm excited to dive in, but that's not an exciting story. What is your first experience with this movie?
So what's funny is I actually hadn't seen this movie, at least not in its entirety, until maybe 10 years ago.
Wow.
So it's not like a super like nostalgic as far as the movie itself, although I think I have vague memories of like seeing parts of it on cable or something. I feel like it was one of those that
Okay.
was but what really drew me into this movie, oddly enough, is the poster of this film. I think is one of the greatest pieces of movie art ever made.
Wow, I'm gonna have to look that up immediately. So
Yes,
don't
I
mind me
should have
while I
warned
do that.
you. Yeah,
No, you're
but
good. You're good.
I have such a distinct memory of seeing the box art for it at the video store because I just turned 40, so this movie is actually a few years older than I am. So I didn't, I
Nice.
wasn't
Welcome
around
to the
when it was.
40 and Up Club, and also happy
Hey,
belated birthday.
thank you. And hey, happy to be here. Happy to be still
Same.
around. Living a good life. So very very cool.
Yay.
40's been fun so far. But I used to go to the video store like pretty much every week, and it's funny because it kind of drove my mom nuts because we would go and I would be in there for like an hour because going to the video store was almost as much fun as watching whatever movie we picked up. But like I love to peruse the aisles and look at all the different like VHS boxes and stuff. Um, and it's funny. I said it drove my mom nuts, but like now I think it's like, oh, look at all these great memories that my son has, or like that we had together. Like this,
Aw.
it's like a nice thing now, where it's like, oh,
Yeah.
because now it's like there are no video stores, and like we don't get to do that,
So true.
Um, but I just so distinctly remember for Excalibur and just like looking at the image of what that poster is and just being like, it's kind of abstract, but then the more you look at it, the more that gets revealed. It's like you can clearly see the sword the sword of Excalibur like in it, and then you're like, it's got this paintings of like red and this kind of crystally green, but then you look closer and you're like, oh, there's Merlin's face, oh, there's Mordred's body armor, oh, there's like horses like deep within there, and it just, I don't know, it's just like gives off such a vibe. It's such a cool image to me, and I feel like I'm already getting off on like 100 tangents, but
No, you're fine.
I had a goal, like, so, as I said earlier, I was kind of going through a lot of changes in my life over the last couple of years, and I had to relocate. Now I've had to relocate a couple times, but now I own my own home, and which is crazy to me still. And one of the things I kind of was like giving myself the kind of like, hey, when you've kind of like turned this corner in your life, one of the things I made a list of things. I was like, I want this to kind of be a representation of like, hey, we did it. And one of those things was getting that Excalibur poster. And
Wow.
now that poster hangs on my wall. And
That's awesome.
what's funny is I found a really good reproduction, and I was like, no, I can be okay with that. And then once I moved into my new house, I was actually able to find an original one from 1981 in amazing condition.
Whoa.
And I got it at such a reasonable price. I don't know how, because I've seen it go for a lot more. And so now that's the one that's hanging in my bedroom now. So.
Wow. What a journey. That's so cool. I love the way you personalized it, and just, talking about the positive memories growing up, but then bringing it full circle to getting your own home. That's so cool that this movie's really gone on a journey with you, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, just that sheet of paper, just the poster of it is like such a thing. And then once I saw the movie, I kind of was like, yeah, like this vibe, this kind of like, it feels like it's like, I know it's such a cliche thing to be like, they don't make movies like that anymore, but it's like, but they really don't.
They really don't. Yeah.
Like something like this. It's like, even just, some people might look at a movie like this and think like, oh, some of this is dated, and I don't even know if I can even argue, but like, that's also part of the charm and part of what I love about it, is that it's so like of a time that's just not here anymore. Like, it doesn't look like a modern movie. It looks like this like older film in a way, if that makes sense.
No, I totally agree. I was thinking, honestly, when you selected it, that, we did Masters of the Universe. You asked me about Highlander, which we happened to already cover, but you definitely have a niche, right? Like, you like fantasy and fantasy of kind of a fairly specific era.
Yeah. I think it's one of those, like, I mean, I love all sorts of stuff, but I feel like I found this little pocket of things that are like, I think it's kind of that contrarian to me, / that, like, how people like that band because nobody else knows about them.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a little bit of that, where it's like, here's this era of stuff. It's like, everybody's into Batman, everybody's into like Spider-Man and like all these big movies, and it's like, well, what do I want? It's like, well, I want like He-Man and Skeletor, and it's like, but I also, I think the 80s were just like an interesting time, and I think because the home video market was becoming what it was, it's that like they were doing a lot of movies like that, a lot of like, fantasy, sword and sorcery. And, they obviously, like, 20 years ago, they were doing Lord of the Rings, which we'll have to circle back to with some topics with that. But like the 80s ones where it's like, no, they were doing this, the budget for this movie was $11 million,
Yeah.
And, now it's like, they wouldn't do that because they would be like, well, let's do $100 million. It's like, I don't know, just that kind of like bootstrapping it and doing it in camera and practical stuff,
Yeah.
Super cool.
I feel like when they try to do, like I was trying to think of like really big movies that are epics, that are long. I'm thinking of like the most recent one being maybe like that Napoleon movie. But
yeah,
they don't make the money that they used to, and they certainly don't draw in the audience that they used to. So it's just not the same anymore.
And I wonder if that, everybody kind of keeps talking about how box office is changing, and like, every week
Mhm.
it's like movies are dead, and then something like Deadpool comes out and it's like movies are back.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
and it's clearly like the market is fluctuating or something's going on.
Yeah.
And
I
I
think it just takes a lot to get people to the movie theater. So a strong IP that people want and crave, they're gonna go see because
yeah.
it's fun to do. But they're not gonna, gone are the days of like, I'm just gonna walk into the theater and watch a movie. Like it's too expensive, honestly, to do anymore, I feel
I
like.
think I'm the only person in the town that I live in that does that. I
Well,
think
I'm
like
very jealous because
yeah.
I used to. I remember that's how I saw Snowpiercer. Like I remember I came to, the theater. My friend actually took, public transportation to get there. And then we're like, let's see this. Like that was the last time I did something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a while ago.
I mean,
But yeah,
I have
oh,
the
go
A
ahead.
list, so it's
Oh,
like,
I've got that too, but it's finding the time. It's finding
yeah,
the time, I
yeah.
guess.
I
I don't know. I'm
I
running out of
I
excuses to to not be you, so maybe I need to just get to the theater more.
well, I'm also very very lucky that I have very I'm freelance and very flexible, and I have, like I have
That's a good point.
like I can carve out a time in the middle of it like Tuesday and go to a movie. So like but yeah, it's just there's not like opportunity for like movies like this anymore. I mean, even look at like 10 years, they made a King Arthur movie 10 years ago, and it
Oh, yeah.
was like
Nobody
it
wanted that. Nobody
and
wanted to see it.
I will say right now, I love that one. I think it's
I
fantastic. I
haven't
think it's
seen it, I don't think, so
our
I'm
well,
not gonna
maybe we should do that
prejudge.
one at some
Maybe we
point too.
should. Maybe we should. Well,
But
on the
it's
oh, go ahead.
good. I was just gonna say I thought it was great, but I mean nobody showed up. Yeah, it was like
Right.
financially of just a bomb, and yeah, it's
Mhm.
like, but going back to Masters of the Universe, it's like there's casting coming out for the one that they've been trying to make for the past like 10 years, and so it seems like it might actually be happening this time, and
Oh,
I
interesting.
I I'd be very curious to see how it like does as far as the money, because like hopefully it's not like the Dungeons and Dragons, which I thought was a great movie, but kind of underperformed. It's like
Yeah, and it was kind
so
of, it was different, right? Like it was
yeah.
a lot it was more humor based and yeah. Well, before we talk too much specifically about this film, I do want to share the synopsis of it. But I will say that there's not really a spoiler free version of this podcast. So if you're scared of spoilers, I would pause and watch this. I did rent it on iTunes for about $3.99, so you can do that. It was only $1 more to own it, and my finger hovered over whether or not I should own it, but I just feel like I'll end up with too many films, so I was like, let me watch it first. But
Yeah.
anyways, here's the synopsis. The magical sword of Excalibur starts off in the hands of British Lord Uther Pendragon, or Pendragon, or Pendragon?
Pendragon.
Pendragon, okay. And then years later finds its way to his bastard son Arthur, the knave destined to become king. Aided by the sorcerer Merlin, Arthur fulfills his fate by bringing together the knights of the Round Table at Camelot and unifying the country. However, this flawed monarch faces greater tests ahead in pursuit of love, the Holy Grail, and his nation's survival. And I did pull that from Wikipedia, but I think it, sums up the film. I have a couple of quick facts too that I want to share before we get started further. But the first one is writer, producer, director Sir John Boorman wanted the movie to focus on the story and not the actors and actresses that are in the film. So he cast relative unknown actors. So at the time, only Nicole Williamson was relatively familiar to American moviegoers, which is so interesting because I feel like it launched some careers here, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It
Yeah.
was there were a lot of theater actors or kind of just up and coming actors got their start doing this
Yeah.
movie.
And then this might tie into what you were going to say earlier, but apparently also on that Sir John Boorman was originally going to make a Lord of the Rings movie, but he didn't get the rights, and so we got this one. What are your thoughts on that? Did you want to see a John Boorman Lord of the Rings, or? How do you feel about that?
I think it's interesting because they wound up there was a Lord of the Rings movie a few years later in the 80s that was an animated, and it was like that rotoscope style animation.
Yeah,
But
I like those. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. It's I think it's probably a hard watch when you are used to the ones that we know from Peter Jackson. Like
Oh, for sure.
if you're going backwards, you're kind of like, well, man, they're just cramming a lot into like a 2 hour movie, um,
Right.
but yeah, I think if you watch Excalibur, you can kind of get a sense of what he would have done with Lord of the
Mhm.
Rings if he was able to kind of do what he was trying to do. And yeah, I know he said he couldn't watch the animated one, the Ralph Bakshi one, because it was,
Oh, wow.
because he was just so bummed because he spent so much time and was really trying to like make something with that, and then he kind of like had to pivot. But um yeah, I think it would have been cool. I think John Borman's just a really interesting director. I mean, he did this, and he did Deliverance, and he did The Exorcist too, but, which I think is an interesting movie. But actually, that's actually how he wound up here. Is that The Exorcist 2 did so poorly, and he was like, he was desperate for like a hit. He needed something to kind of be a successful thing because there was so much backlash against this Exorcist sequel.
Yeah, so
um,
have you seen that? Is it really that bad?
The Exorcist 2.
Mhm.
Um, the original Exorcist is one of my all-time favorite movies. I don't know if anybody's done
Great
that on
film.
this
Yep,
show.
I
Okay,
think
I was
we
gonna
have,
say
yeah.
I kind of
So
I
good.
figure because that's like considered so great by so many. So it's one of those. I've seen all the sequels, but they always get graded on a curve of like you will never be that first one, so it doesn't really matter, like
Yeah, no, that
it
makes
doesn't
sense.
need to touch that. But yeah, I went into the second one just hearing nothing but awful things, and I kind of came out of it. I'm like, well, I don't think it's awful. I think it's different, and it seemed like it wasn't necessarily what they were intended. Like I just got a vibe, and then of course I do the deep dive of like reading articles and going through interviews and like because originally Linda Blair didn't want to do it, and then she was like actually like won over by the script and by what they were
Oh,
envisioning,
no.
and then it just kind of backfired and it didn't go down. That's the thing. Making movies is a miracle. The fact that you get that
Right.
many people trying to do something to all and for it to work out is fascinating. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I think if you haven't seen it and you're interested, I say watch it. But
Okay.
it's not. I didn't. It's just it's kind of an odd movie, I would say.
Okay, that's fair. Um, I think from here we can take it whatever direction you want. Like, do you wanna talk about the cast? Do you wanna talk about specific scenes?
Well, yeah, we kind of brought up the cast and how there's a lot of people, people that we kind of are seeing for the first time in film.
Yeah.
I think probably one of the most notable ones is Liam Neeson is Gawain, and
Mhm.
how yeah, like he would, he hadn't really done much, and then this is one of Helen Mirren's first roles, and those two actually started dating when they were working on this movie, and they dated for a number
Mm.
of years. I was actually before we got on, I was just watching an interview of them on the Graham Norton show, and
Oh,
he
wow.
and Liam Neeson like tells a really funny story about like when he saw her for the first time in her costume as Morgan, and the actor Syrian Hines, who was one of
Mhm.
the other knights, like I guess Syrian Hines and Liam Neeson like are friends to this day, and he was just saying how they both kind of like looked at her and their jaws were on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, she
So
does look beautiful.
yeah, she just gives such a performance in this too. Like I think like it's I think a lot of these actors were doing theater before, and I think that's one of the things that I think why it feels so like not modern of a film is that like that the performances I think are dialed up.
Yes.
They're playing to that back row. I have a weird thing with this movie, where I feel like if you take Excalibur and you want to do a double feature with another movie, there's two movies that I constantly recommend, and it might sound weird to some, but I could talk about it all day. And one of them One of them is Bram Stoker's Dracula.
I could see that. There is a I think for me, what's similar about this with that is there is a dream-like quality.
Yes.
Like there's a lot of scenes where it feels like you're in someone's dream or someone's in a trance, and that for me mimics in Dracula, you know, when he would glamour people, or a lot of the scenes with Lucy.
Yeah.
You know, especially when someone's like turning into a vampire, like there's just a lot of that. It does give a similar vibe. And then the second thing that's similar is how the costumes are, you know, of course, not historically accurate, but they are interesting
Nope.
and futuristic looking and very different. And so like and I guess the sexuality too. There's a lot of
Yeah.
heightened sexuality, but in a art house style way. It's not like HBO. It's more
Right.
like,
Right. Yeah. Right.
you know, it's like it's yeah, they're naked and everything like that, but it's not sexy. It's like it's more odd and like
It's
dreamlike.
and it is serving a story, like a story purpose, and
Yes.
like I think like one of the themes of this movie is very much like lust. You know, like I mean,
Mhm.
the whole thing with the, you know, like the first 20 minutes is like Uther just being horned up and really wanting, you know, really wanting the Duke's wife, and the amount of mistakes that he makes, and that's what drives him is you know, and he isn't thinking about what the consequences are of that desire and all that. And so yeah, I think it's not like this just like, yeah, like let's get a bunch of people naked. It's like, you know, it's there's
Yeah.
more of a drive to it, and it's part of the whole. Yeah, I don't even know what word to put on it, but yeah,
It's got a really specific like aesthetic,
yes.
and it does, especially like the masks and stuff that people have in the film, like
Mhm.
that also really reminds me of that sort of, you know, strange costumes that, like I said, aren't really historically accurate, but
No, yeah,
definitely um they're definitely a vibe. I don't know.
yeah,
They're different.
and that was by design. Like yeah, like that kind of body armor like wasn't till like the, you know, like 15th century or something like that. Like in you know, this is supposed to be like the Dark Ages and all that, and it's like, but John Borman even said that he wanted it to be like, to kind of just have this feel and be like not of a particular time, but just be like a mythological kind of thing. So he would just kind of take whatever made sense to him, and you know, and it's so funny because now it's like I feel like everything since this, you know, like as far as like Arthurian legend, it's like, well, this is what most people think of is like, you know, even though it's not historically accurate and it's not, you know, it's not based in any kind of fact. It's just kind of like, okay, well, here's the idea, and let's just make it however we want. And it's kind of,
Right.
yeah. And there's that green hue that comes through, and the fogginess and the haziness. You know, this movie was nominated for best cinematography at the Oscars that
Wow.
year. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
but back to that comparison of Bram Stoker's Dracula. I just think like I think they both have that like, I think Bram Stoker's Dracula, I think, gets criticized a lot for some of the performances in it, and I always want to argue it, you know, even though like
Oh, yeah, I disagree. I love it.
I think it's you know, some people are like, oh, it's cheesy, it's hammy. It's like, no, it's they're playing to the back
It's
row, like
theatrical.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's such like it's so big and operatic, and that's like intentional. Even Keanu, like I know people like kind of try and pinpoint him specifically, and I was like, and I know he's not a fan of his performance, but I don't know, for me it totally works. And I think in here too is that like everybody's kind of doing these big like Niall Terry as King Arthur is you know, he's supposed to be this noble king, and he kind of is very like, yes, I am a king, and I will, you know, like I'm gonna do the right thing, and we will create a round table. You know, it's very like firm in its you know, stance with that kind of acting style and performance. And um I just think it works for when you're telling a story like this. Like yeah, it probably wouldn't work if you're telling like a drama that takes place at a restaurant, you know.
Right. I
Yeah.
think like the story itself, the legend, you know, I think when you look it up, it's like the legend, right? It's not like
Hmm.
the book or something. And so
Right.
I feel like it does have a very strange quality to it. I mean, a lot of it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It does feel very dreamlike and very myth and very legend. It doesn't, yeah. So I think the vibe fits the material for sure. Um, what what are some? Did we talk about Patrick Stewart yet?
No, yeah.
Okay.
Did
Well,
that guy ever have hair?
I guess not. Like, but it certainly has kept him looking ageless for a long time.
Yeah, I
But
mean, he looks great. Like, I don't mean that as a
yeah.
slight. It's just
Oh
funny. It's
no.
like this is like 40 years later, and it's like he's so identifiable by his perfectly shaped bald head and
Oh
his
yeah.
speech.
100%. I mean, I knew he was like that his background was in like Shakespearean acting. But
Hmm.
yeah, like this predates, Star Trek.
Yeah,
So,
by a
yeah,
while, yeah.
by several years. So like this is our first exposure to him, and like no matter what you watch him in, I just see Captain Jean-Luc Picard, but like that was nice. Like you said, him, Liam Neeson, like seeing some really quality actors, for the very first time. It's got a great cast.
Yeah. I love Nicole Williamson as Merlin. I love that he's kind of this manipulator, and he's kind of
Hmm.
just like he's kind of like goofy at times, but then sinister at times and playful, but like, like there's the scene when, like shortly after like Arthur pulls the sword from the stone, and he's knighted, and they're at the hall, and you know Arthur's looking over at Guinevere as she's dancing, and he's all like, hey, are we gonna be married? And he's kind of just like, yeah, there's a bunch of other stuff that's gonna mess you up. And he's like, great, we're getting married. He's like, you're not listening. Like,
Yeah.
that kind of like offhanded.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, it's just that, like, I love that Merlin's kind of this all-knowing thing, and just the way he plays it, and like, when he's out in the woods with him, and kind of just like, and Arthur's like, well, what do I do? He's like, I don't know, you know what you're doing. And he's like, oh, I should do this. He's like, see, you figured it out. Like, kind of just like, almost not taking it seriously, but like that's the charm of it, is,
Yeah.
and I just kind of love that, like, Merlin's arc in this is that, he's, magic is kind of disappearing from this world. Like, this is the last era of like this type of legend and these type of like beings, and so he's kind of ready to move on to the next world, and but he's got to make sure that like Earth has like a real king that can handle it and stuff like that. So yeah, just a
Yeah.
fun performance with that one.
Completely agree. Are there any like specific scenes that you wanted to kind of expound on or touch on?
I mean, there's a couple.
You're like,
But
there's many, but
yeah,
yeah.
well, I think that the opening is so great because it just kind of starts so bluntly, and it's just like the Dark
Yeah.
Ages. There's no king, and it just gets right into it, for being this kind of like sprawling epic, that in one of the other things that I kind of like, that in regards to comparing it to like Bram Stoker's Dracula, is that there's almost this like passing of the baton of who's the lead, which is kind of unconventional
Mm.
story, but I think, like, if you watch like Bram Stoker's Dracula, it's like there's a whole arc of Keanu, and there's a whole arc with Dracula himself, and then a whole arc with Lucy, and they're all kind of like the focal point, and so it's almost like this episodic thing, and that's Excalibur. I think it's so much like that, where it's like the first 20 minutes is a whole movie, short film in itself, like of Uther's journey, and how
Mm.
he gets the sword, and then it's almost as soon as he gets it and makes peace with the land, he screws it up by just seeing Igraine, and then the whole, later on in the film, there's the whole scene of the search for the Ark, or the Grail, and Percival is the lead of that arc, you know,
Yeah.
and like Arthur kind of takes the back seat in that storyline. So yeah, I think the opening stuff with I think the it's just well shot, which is I guess a miracle because apparently they had to fire the DP because the guy they shot it all and then they lost like 2 days of film
Oh my gosh.
because they didn't like keep it right or so. I can't remember the exact story, but they wound up getting a different DP who I believe was the cameraman, and then he just got bumped up.
Wow. A
Yeah,
lucky
and so
break for him.
right, and then he gets nominated for an Oscar.
Wow.
Yeah, there's that scene. I think the whole thing with Lancelot at the bridge is a great scene. I think that's where the movie is the most like it feels the most like traditional classic, of just like Lancelot staying at the bridge being like, I need to fight, and then and then the fact that they have this fight and you see Arthur like kind of call on Excalibur's power to win, and but then he realizes like, oh, I was just being vain, and that's when the Lady of the Lake's like, all right, well, you can have the sword back, and she kind of rejuvenates it, and because like, oh, well, you see the error of your ways, as opposed to like his father who was just like, I want this lady, like it's I think that's like a great moment, and then I feel like I'm running down like all because
Oh no,
there's so
you're
many.
fine.
But there's this during the whole arc of like finding the Grail when Percival like goes and sees all the other knights that have tried to get to Mordred, and they're all hanging, and you see like the crow like pecking out the eyeball. I think that's just like a haunting image. Like I don't know what they put in there to be like the rotted flesh, but
Ugh.
it's just truly disturbing.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that the Mordred's helmet and body armor are so just like intense looking, and like because like it's such like a there's so much silver, but then earth tones, and then with like a green magical hue over everything, and then you have this bright gold figure coming out. Um, what about you though? Since this is your first time watching, I've seen this several times, but what were some scenes that stood out to you?
So there, I guess a movie that I thought about watching this. Have you seen The Green Knight?
I have, yeah, I
Okay,
really liked
I
that
thought
one.
about that. When I watched it, there's a lot of scenes, like you said. I think it might be easier for me to go by maybe by images. I liked when he pulled the sword out of the stone because that is, for me, that's like the core of like what I remember about this story. And it honestly kind of reminds me of the animated Sword in the Stone, which was like
The
one of
Disney
my,
one.
yes, I
Yeah,
absolutely loved that movie.
yeah, I
Um,
watched that a lot as a kid.
yeah, so I liked that scene. Um, I liked that, you kind of talked about this already, but it almost feels like you're watching a couple movies in one,
Hmm.
where we spend a lot of time in certain parts of the characters' lives, narratives change and things like that. So I think overall I really liked the flow of it. I'm trying to think of I think anytime they went back to the water and the sword in the lake, I think I liked all those scenes a lot.
Hmm.
And
It's such
then
a like strong image, like
yeah.
the hand like holding the sword like straight up, and then obviously they like rewind the footage when she like lowers it just to give it,
Yeah.
but it gives it that like extra odd feeling, like this kind of it's this ethereal character who's like literally just hanging on to it.
Yeah, the way she, like, fades away, like, into
Yeah.
the water, I thought was interesting. Um, I mean, I guess, she's a bad guy, but I liked the I guess, like, Helen Mirren's character, which is kind of like almost like a witch.
Yeah.
And she later wants to be Merlin's apprentice. I thought her arc was interesting, and I always feel
Story
like
about
yeah,
Do you know
go
the
ahead.
story about so Helen Mirren and Nicole Williamson, I guess, like worked on did a production of, I think, Hamlet together,
Oh,
and
interesting.
they did not get along. They had like
Oh,
they were like not on good terms when they first started shooting this movie. And I guess John Borman was like, yeah, but that's working because you guys have these two characters, like Morgana and Merlin have this kind of like tumultuous relationship too. They're kind of
for
like,
sure.
and it kind of fed into that. And then I guess during the production they patched things up, and they wound up becoming good friends after that, which is great. Like I don't I don't like the idea of people not getting along on set. That just
Sure.
sounds like a nightmare. But it's just interesting to kind of like know that played into like maybe how their performances kind of like worked with slash against each other. So.
Yeah. That's really fascinating, honestly. Like that's interesting, but
And that layer, that like Merlin's layer, like just looks
mhm.
so cool. Like that's
Yeah.
such a cool set. I would love to walk around on. And they don't, nowadays it would be the volume, and they would be standing on just one crystal or something.
Right. Yeah.
So.
But I liked all that. I thought the way that Merlin was portrayed was interesting. Like, I guess he's a good guy. Sometimes he comes across his energy is weird, I guess you
Hmm.
could say. He's just played so strangely and differently, but I think in a lot of ways, like, kind of makes sense for that type of character. And I guess, like, overall, I think that a lot of like I'm even thinking of like House of the Dragon and things like that. Like the dynamics between certain characters just kind of reminded me of this movie, and I think I was just surprised by that.
Yeah, it's one of those. That's one of those performances that I feel like every time I watch it, I kind of like notice more of it. I don't know if you kind of have that feeling when you watch a movie over and over again. Like you kind of like there's
Oh
like
yeah.
those details that like come out. And like yeah, because he is playing it. It's like yeah, he's Arthur's kind of like right hand guy, but he's kind of doing some shady stuff at times. He's very mischievous, and
Yeah. There's
he
something
I
like weird about like a right hand to the king that is also magical. You're just always kind of like, is this guy like a Rasputin type or like
yeah,
what's
yeah.
happening here? Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually, but before we got on, I was just watching somebody else's like interpretation of it and on YouTube, and they were talking about how it's like, how religion is such a factor in this too, and how like, oh, this god like Merlin, because he has these, in how he's having putting his son in such a situation. And I thought that was interesting. I think there's plenty of discussion you could have going that route.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I think just like, but the way he moves, just like his eyebrows, even, and he's
Yeah.
wearing that really cool kind of like domed helmet, like it like so tightly grips his head. And I don't know if you noticed, there's one shot in particular where it's he's taking up like 80% of the screen, and he turns his head around, and I believe it's when Uther is with Igraine, and that's basically when Arthur is conceived, and he's kind of watching in the distance. He's looking out at the
Mhm.
castle, and he kind of turns towards camera, and he's like the future has taken root in the present. Um,
Mm.
and if you look at that shot, you can totally see the camera in the reflection of the helmet.
How funny.
And there's a few other times where if you look at like the body, the body armor is so shiny and reflective that you're gonna see crew, and their way to deal with that was just to not. They were like, we're not gonna like, this is how we want the shot to look, and it's like it's not gonna be, if you're noticing that, then you're not noticing, then you're already checked out. You know what I mean? Which
Wow.
I think was the right approach,
Yeah,
frankly.
no, I agree with
Because
that.
it's like I've heard people say it, and I never noticed it until now that I kind of look for it. You know what I mean? So, um,
100%.
yeah, but yeah, I think Merlin's just a fun character, and like, yeah, he kind of looks a little different than the traditional. He doesn't have like the long white beard and pointy hat, with the
Yeah.
the Gandalf, but yeah, he's doing something, and he's always up to something.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about some of your favorite scenes, about the cast, a little bit about the director. Are there other aspects of the film that you wanted to talk about, like the music, or you talked a little bit about the cinematography?
Yeah, the music is pretty interesting because it's using a few pieces of like classical, like it's I'm really bad with classical. I'm gonna sound like I'm like not an educated music scholar if I say the
Well,
wrong
you're in
name.
good
So,
company, so.
but the composer, I guess he said he was kind of like, his name is Trevor Jones, but he's the one that kind of does a lot of like the moody stuff, like the scenes where you see like the Lady of the Lake, or when like when magic is kind of being properly used in the film, that kind of like stuff. That's all him,
Mm.
and I think it's really cool. But then I also do think it's cool that, like, you're using O Fortuna when they're riding the horses back, when they finally have the Grail and Arthur's like back to his health and the land is kind of growing again. I think that's such like an epic moment, and that music is just like, punching the whole time. So I think it's interesting to kind of to use like classical motifs and stuff, but then also have an original score that can still stand out. That's a pretty impressive balancing act.
I agree, and I think it's interesting because, like you said, it's sort of you have it kind of like both elements in the same film that like contribute to like how unique it is. Because I feel like usually you pick one over the other.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think it just gives the movie this kind of like timeless, like, like it's good. They didn't, I wouldn't expect them to, get like a pop singer to do like a credit song or
Yeah.
anything like that. Like, I don't think that would work here, but it's just like, but then you have these like classical pieces that are like, hundreds of years old now, or, whatever they may be. And it gives us this more timeless flair, and kind of, it adds to this like epic quality,
Yeah, 100%. Well, what other aspects of the film did you want to discuss?
I think it's a cool, like, cool thing. Oh, it was so funny. I was just saying, like, the whole, like, the future is taking root in the present thing, and
Yeah.
I've talked a lot about Bram Stoker's Dracula, but I also think
Mhm.
another movie or movies to kind of like pair it up with, like, the one I would pair it up with is Batman versus Superman. Oddly enough,
Interesting.
I don't know if have you done that. Has somebody done that movie on here?
Yes, we
Okay.
have. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. But there's like literally that line of dialogue, the future is taking root in the present, is used in Justice League.
Wow. So that
And
must have been intentional, which it kind of makes sense given the vibe of that film.
well, yeah. And then there's the other moment towards the end of Excalibur, where Arthur is, like, they're going after, like Mordred's army and stuff, and the fog's blocking them out, and they're like, "Oh, we'll use the old ways," and that's literally what Darkseid says at the end of Justice League. When he's like, "Oh,
Wow.
we're not," it's so, yeah, it's clearly intentional. And I know Zack Snyder has been on record like saying Excalibur is like one of his favorite films. He has an
I
Excalibur
could
poster in
totally
it.
see that.
He has an Excalibur poster in his gym. But if you look at Batman versus Superman, the scene where the Waynes get murdered, the movie that they're coming out of is Excalibur. And
Wow.
and
Interesting. Full circle.
the thing that really gets me is the ending of this movie. We see Mordred coming up to Arthur, and he pierces him with a spear, but it goes all the way through, and Arthur plunges Excalibur into him.
Mm.
And the end of Batman versus Superman, Doomsday is plunging his one of his spiked arms through Superman, and Superman takes the Kryptonian spear and shoves it through him. It's like shot for shot. Like,
Wow.
it's like,
I would have never known that.
yeah, it's like one of those, like, and also just the fact that they're both kind of these episodic you know, like, and I think, you know, I'm one of those people. I think Batman versus Superman is an amazing film. I feel like, you know, I know it kind of gets a lot of flack and people hate on it, and that's the cool thing to
Yeah.
do.
I liked it a lot, as you
I
know.
yeah, I love it, and I think there's a lot of cool stuff in there. But I think like the part of the reason why maybe it does rub some people the wrong way, and I could be wrong. I'm not trying to speak for anybody, but it's also the same thing with Excalibur in the sense that it's not this like proper beginning, middle, and end. It's kind of
Yeah.
these a lot of it's a lot. They're both feel like there's a lot of vignettes
Mm-hmm.
come together to make a full experience. I still feel like they both feel like full films. I don't,
Yeah.
you know, but they're not traditionally structured. I think they do kind of,
Definitely.
you know, like also like Dracula, like we said, like where it's like the lead kind of shifts depending on what portion of the film we're at, and I think, you know, there's a lot of visual elements to Batman versus Superman that's like clearly pulled from Excalibur. Um, and it's just cool to see how influential like something like that can be, and then it moves on to like, you know, this massive, you know, superhero you know thing is such a cool thing.
Yeah.
um
No, I completely agree. Thank you for sharing that.
but yeah, I love another thing I love is just like Nigel Terry, the fact that they got the same actor to play King Arthur in like all these stages of his life. I thought
Yeah.
was definitely a cool choice. I think I believe Nigel Terry was like in his 30s when he did this movie, and so he's playing like a very boyish boy, and he's kind of playing a like, you know, there's a scene where he's just bouncing around in the woods and, you know,
Yeah.
flinging his sword around, and it's like, oh yeah, you're kind of a dumb kid. And then they do this the transition where he, you know, now he has a beard and he's in full armor, and um you know, and that's, I feel like that's probably a hard character to do because
Sure.
it's kind of like the Captain America thing of like, or Superman, or so, you know, like I know I keep going. I'm a comic book nerd, so I'm going to keep going back to
That's
characters like
fine.
that.
I feel like this suits
But
that, honestly.
yeah, but I think that's where it's, you know, those kind of come from myths, you know, like
Yeah.
in the same way King Arthur, you know, myths and legends, they're all kind of blend together. But it's like, but King Arthur is just this very pure, you know, like he doesn't come from a pure place. He's like, you know, his dad's kind of a jerk, at least in this version of the story.
Hmm.
And, you know, he kind of comes from nothing, but he's this very pure of art person, and that's like
Hmm.
what carries him and makes him what he is. But I also think I think they do an interesting job of making that like to almost to a fault, where it's like, you know, he has a complicated relationship with his wife, with Guinevere, and how she falls
Yeah.
for another man. um so much of it is like, well, he has such a sense of duty, and, you know, to
Yeah.
being the king, and he understands the responsibility that comes with being this kind of chosen one kind of thing. uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and I love kind of Guinevere's like arc, you know, like she kind of goes to be a nun after, you know, she has an affair with Lancelot, and, you know, it's, but she always, you know, she keeps the sword the whole time, and so she's and she just has this great line at the end where she's like, you know, you are a great king, and sometimes you're a good husband, you know.
Yeah.
um and that, you know, like Lancelot becomes, you know, like a religious fanatic as well. And I mean, some of that's some maybe outdated beliefs of like, you know, oh, we, you know, we cheated, and so, oh god, let's, you know, but I think
Yeah,
it's
let's
like,
right
it's,
the ship and go the other extreme.
yeah,
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 pretty
the
much.
extreme other direction. But I think it's, you know, it's a interesting like visual element, and the,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know, storytelling element in the movie.
And
um
I would venture to say maybe that happens, right? Like, I feel like, modern day royalty would be like famous people. It always feels like after they make a horrible mistake, they're like, now I am really religious and would never do that again. Like I do feel like that happens. Like there's
yeah,
social
oh,
pressure to
100%.
apologize and say you're going to do better. So, maybe that was the medieval version of that.
Right, right. But then it's, I think it's a great moment at the end when like Lancelot is like dying, and he's like, you know, is Guinevere still the queen? And he's like, yeah, she is. And like he kind of like Arthur like forgives it all, and he's all like, I'd rather have you, you know. And he goes to Guinevere, and he's like, I hope when I see you in the next life, like
Oh,
you'll come to me and it's and be with me. And
oh.
you know, I think that's I think, you know, it's good to forgive people. I think there's a, you know, like, because
Yeah, it's very noble, you know. And
it's like he's such a noble character, and I'm like, you know, I think I'm kind of a cheese ball where I like I'm always I root for the super good guy, and I mean I don't think I'm like this pure good person. I think I'm as flawed as anybody else, but I always like, it's my, you know, I have a goal in life. I would love to be a good person. I want to do good. I want people, you know, I hope people think well of me, not in the like shallow way, but like I hope I can
yeah.
be there for people. And so it's like seeing him like, oh, you were betrayed by these people and you still can, you know, forgive them. And you know, like,
Yeah.
and even with his son, like, you know, more, you know, Mordred comes to, and he's like, give me everything. He's like, well, I can give you my love, but I can't just give you the land. This belongs to the people. And you know, even though his son is clearly evil, and you know, he can still like be like, I will care about you, but I'm not going to just give you, you know, anything.
Yeah, I think like he seems to take the high road and believe that people can change and be good. And yeah, I agree. I want to believe that too.
Yeah, I think but like I said, that I think it makes it a hard character to play, because I think you lose, you know, you could lose that arc
Yeah.
if you play it too noble. You know what I mean? It's like,
Then
well, it's like,
then it
well,
is cheesy. Yeah.
yeah, or he has no journey to go on. You
Hmm.
know, and you know, again, kind of going to those religious themes. It's like, you know, when he kind of gets up after Percival gets the Grail, and kind of, you know, like you know, he is pure, you know, pure at heart, and he understands now that like Arthur and the land are one, and so we have to take care of one to take care of the other. And then Arthur gets up and he's just like, you know, Morgana was my sins, and you know, like Guinevere was my guilt. And it's just like, he's like, you know, I'm as flawed as anybody, but I need to be out here and I need to be doing this, you know.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think there's, you know, I think sometimes this movie does get criticized, and which is fine. I think, you know, for like kind of being style over substance, which I can kind of see the argument, because it's a very stylized movie. It's very like art directed, you know, like in visual and all that. But I think there is like a good heart in there, and there is
Yeah.
a good story, and I like seeing the characters' journey like through all that.
Yeah. No, I can agree with that. Well, is there anything that we've missed talking about, or do you feel like we
I'm
covered
sure there is. I'm sure as soon as we jump off here, I'm gonna be like, oh, I forgot to say this. I forgot to say that.
it? That's always the way, though.
You're right, right. But I think it's just a, like, you know, like we kind of said before. I think it's just one of those that like it's just an interesting moment in film history, because it's kind of
Hmm.
like there were Star Wars movies out at this point, but it wasn't like, you know, but we weren't at that like part of the 80s where, like, you know, we weren't getting the like aliens and RoboCop and Terminator stuff. It's
Yeah.
just like little pocket like before all that. And so
Mm.
um
Kind of
you know,
struck at
so
the right time.
yeah, but it also feels like, it feel like I can totally understand people watching it and feel like thinking it's like from the 70s as opposed to the
Hmm.
80s, you know, because
Yeah.
um and I just love how they just kind of like did so much in camera, like, you know, like they had that green reflective sheen every time there was like magic in there. And it's, you know, they didn't overuse magic. It wasn't this like big special effects spectacle kind of thing. It has like this like grittiness to it, and almost
Hmm.
like, even though we, you know, we've kind of talked about how like the it's not like historically accurate to the age, as far as like, you know, they weren't wearing those kinds of outfits, and those things didn't exist in the, you know, but like it still feels like it's like sort of historical element, or kind of like from an era, like even if it's like lost to time kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. If you had to summarize, what is it specifically that kind of keeps drawing you back to this film?
I think it just is one. I'm just a nerd, and so I just feel like it's such a like. I feel like it's it's just my jam because I'm like, yeah, swords and stuff like that. But yeah, it feels like such like a sophisticated fantasy. Like it feels like it is theatrical. It is big. It does have like swords and magic, but there's also just this earnestness to it where
Mhm.
it kind of takes itself seriously,
Yeah.
without it doesn't feel I don't mean in like it's pretentious, but it's like no, let's be sincere with this. And I think that's really hard to do. It's like we kind of talked about earlier how like the new Dungeons and Dragons, which I think is a really fun movie, don't get me wrong, but I think part of what works for a movie like that is the kind of like we get that this is silly. And
Yes, very
and
much.
I
It's got that sort of almost, I mean, and then I don't mean this offensively, but sort of like that Marvel tinge almost of like
100%.
the way you pull something off is by kind of poking fun at it, is by making it funny. And
Guardians of the Galaxy kind of vibe to
yeah,
that. It's like, which is I'm not even saying is a bad thing either. Like I
no.
think there's absolutely a place for that. But I think what I love about Excalibur is like this is from an era where it's like we didn't it could play it so straight and people
Mhm.
accepted it. And
Yeah.
I think I still watch it and I still just accept it. Like I do understand that like yes, some of the like technical stuff might be a little like from yesteryear, but I'm so engrossed by it every time I watch it. Like I feel like I care about what's going on, but I also just every frame of it just looks like a piece of art. And then also just like the imagery. I mean, like I said at the start of all this, like the that poster I just think is fascinating to look at. Like
Yes.
even now that I have it on my wall, it's like I still catch myself like staring into it. And I think it's also such a great representation of what is inside the film itself. Is that like it's like you have a shot of the sword and you have this shot of like Morgana and you have Merlin back there and you have Mordred on there and the horses and the weapons and the armor, and it just feels like it's like yes, this could have been our world hundreds of years ago, but because it was so long ago or because it isn't real, it feels so different, you know.
Yeah. No, I think you summed it up well. How would you maybe pitch this to someone that, isn't familiar with the property and you're just kind of like, this is what you can expect, or, you know, what would
Um,
pique their interest, do you think?
I think it's a good. So I'm not this like diehard like. I mean, I'm kind of becoming, and I'm kind of searching for more and more because like the Arthurian legend is like one of those things that's so embedded in our culture and
Sure.
storytelling and stuff. So, but I haven't like read like a whole lot of like specific books or anything like that.
Mhm.
So I think like this is just like a great. I think it's like a if you like a Lord of the Rings or maybe even like a Dune, maybe that's a little too spacey
Mm.
in comparison. But I think like if you want to see what those kinds of stories were, how they were told in another era, other than like the art, this modern era of film that we're in,
Yeah.
I think it's a sprawling epic. I think I'm one of those people, and I'm kind of like a joking. I at least hope it comes across as a joking snob, where I'm like, I hate watching a movie broken into pieces. Like I gotta watch, like
Yeah.
especially if it's my first watch. Like if I've never
No,
seen
I
it
get
before, it's
that.
like I gotta turn my phone off. I gotta watch it.
I love
But
that. I mean, you're
yeah,
gonna get more out of it, is the
exactly.
honest
I think
truth when we're
more
so
than
distracted by our
absorb it
phones
all.
these days. Yeah.
And then I'm just like, I'm not gonna miss what somebody was posting on Instagram at the, in the 2 hours I was gone,
So
you know.
true. I never regret taking a break from social media, like
Right, exactly. Um,
so true.
but I think like I think it is one of those movies that I think it works like if you have a Friday night like to yourself or with your partner or whoever, like I think this is a great way to spend 2.5 hours. It's
Yeah.
got romance, adventure. It's got, you know, some interesting performances. It's got great visuals, but it also works as that dad TNT afternoon movie of
Yeah.
just like you can kind of have it on and you can kind of take in the vibe of it. But it also, because it is such a like it's structured outside of the normal 3 act way, that like you could watch it in pieces as like it's a, you know.
Totally.
And I think like, you know, nowadays it's like so many movies are like, well, we're trying to start a franchise. It's like, you know, I'm a huge Terminator fan, but I think it's so funny that the last like 4 Terminator movies have been like, we're going to be part 1 of a trilogy, and then they don't do that well and they don't make it. And it's like,
I know it's like I guess production companies believe there's more of a built-in audience than there really is, or
yeah.
something. Yeah.
And I am that built-in audience, so I'm not trying to take a crack. Like I will be there. I like, you know, I'm super excited. There's a new Terminator anime that comes out next week.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's one of those things where it does kind of drive me nuts, where it's like you're doing one movie that's you're intending to do more, and then you don't get it. And I think what's cool about this one and movies like Bram Stoker's Dracula, and to a lesser extent Justice League, only lesser because there was another movie after that, but like
Yeah.
you take this, instead of doing this kind of 3 act typical thing, like you kind of do this big thing all in one piece, you know. And I think that's such a cool, so it's a unique experience, and I think it might not be for everyone, but I think it's just like, it feels like such a unique movie, even, you know, even within the 80s science fiction fantasy, you know, sword and sorcery stuff.
Yeah. Okay, I think well said. Well, Mike, this has been a great discussion. Thank you for picking this movie, and thank you for coming out of retirement to be on the podcast. Is there anything that you want to plug before you go?
I feel like I plugged it all at the beginning, but if anybody wants to say hi, just, you know, find me on Instagram or add me on Letterboxd or on Twitter, just the Mike Snyder, and
Nice.
say hi. I'm always down to talk movies with new people, and or recommend, you know, if you got something like, oh, if you like this, tell me to watch that. I will almost certainly not watch it for 6 years or more if you recommend me something, but I will always want to watch it. So
Yeah.
but
Very
yeah,
true.
thanks for
Awesome.
having me on here. It's good. It was good to chat with you and catch up and do all this.
Great. Well, I hope to have you back soon.
For sure.